it hasn't penetrated the thick skulls of people like Keir Starmer.
Well, once it has penetrated their thick skulls, then what happens? They can't ignore the reality on the ground. Ukraine is done, and now what? Is it just what are they so afraid of? Is it just that they're going to be incredibly embarrassed? They lied to their people, and the institutions that they represent have lost credibility.
Yeah.
Is that it? I mean, is there some real consequence for the people of Europe?
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. I mean, it would be, they have staked their reputations on that. I think all of them have decided to, like, early on, that they were going to be little Churchills, and they would stand bravely against the aggressor, and that it would be as long as it takes, and they would give brave speeches, and they continue to do that. At some point, it's going to be patently absurd, and I don't know. It's hard to say. These people have, they drank the Kool-Aid, and how are they going to wake up from it? Will they actually wake up from it? They've had demonstrated such a weak grip on reality so far. Will they suddenly wake up to reality, or is it just going to take this delusion, going to take a new form? That's the big question that's in my mind. Like, at that point, do they give up and accept the reality? Or is it at that point where they do something really desperate because they can't give up on their delusion, again, of Western superiority and Russian weakness? That's what they believe in so firmly. It's just something that's really, really important. It seems to me to think for them to believe that Russia is terribly weak and the West is much stronger, and that that's the way things are supposed to be. And if things aren't playing out right on the battlefield, that's because we lack the will. They don't seem to understand the limitations of their own arsenal, their own. At that point, will they actually then directly intervene? But we've talked about that before. It's just like, do they really have anybody to send? I mean, it's just like the British Army said, basically, we can't even do this mission that Starmer is talking about. We just don't even have the guys to do this very limited so-called peacekeeping mission. Things are really the same for the other powers as well. So, but will they still try? And will the Americans, again, Trump's talking about walking away, but he's also talking about the administration is anyway. Well, and he too has, said it actually about providing, air cover. Again, enforcing basically a no-fly zone. Now, this is supposed to be after a ceasefire, but the Russians have just said no way. You're not going to. But then we have, when things really collapse, again, Trump is clearly trying to extricate himself to some extent from this war, and put some distance between himself and it, some distance, but the Americans are still very, very actively involved. But if it just becomes apparent to all, again, it's the moment when the Russians really start marching fast. And I kind of, maybe I'll talk a little about how that might happen. Will Trump himself panic? It's just like, they'll begin saying, he's just like Joe Biden. This is even worse. Joe Biden was, because he was weak, he lost Afghanistan. Now, Trump's going to lose Ukraine, and I think that's something that would be very, very hard for him to deal with, and he might do something reckless. The Americans, might try to impose a no-fly zone. I don't think so, but I wouldn't. It's not entirely impossible.
I mean, are we even capable of having a no-fly zone? I mean, won't Russia just blow up anything that is?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's actually, again, it's just like these political leaders seem to think that it's like you just announce a no-fly zone and the Russians stop flying there. And you get opinion articles like this, like, the Russians wouldn't dare, we just actually challenge our no-fly zone. But what if they do? And then it's, Russian jets shooting down American jets, and there's very powerful Russian air defense all around there. I mean, like, even now, the Ukrainians have a very, very limited air force, but the air forces basically hold up over there in Western Ukraine because they don't even dare to get close to the borders, or to the conflict line, because they approach it and the Russians can shoot them down. And that's going to be true for American American aircraft as well. So yeah, it would. And then you have the U.S. and the Russians fighting a war. We have potentially, you can say, in fact, World War III on our hands. So, I sure don't hope it doesn't come to that, but there is a real risk that that will happen.
Yeah, we like you said, we've had this discussion before. Like, what happens when there's an actual collapse? This is the moment of truth. And previously, I had more concern about the Europeans and the Americans just going all in. But now I don't. I just don't think it's possible. Like you said, there's just the limitations that they have on military weapons, but also just the public support. I just don't. I just don't think anybody's. It's not going to happen. And there's this collective action problem as well. Everybody's looking at the U.S. Well, you do it first, and we'll come in behind you. Or no.
Yeah.
France isn't going to go by itself. Germany's not going to go by itself. None of them will move because it's suicide. The only way that any of them will do it is if the United States comes full in, which it's not, because there's no way that we will. It's going to be so unpopular. So I think, yeah, Ukraine, and the sad thing is that I think a lot of those people that say fight till victory, that 20% in Ukraine, their hope, their belief is that, well, this is existential and we've been promised by the United States, by the UK. They keep on coming here. They keep on hugging Zelensky and giving us all their money and doing all the weapons. We know that they're going to come in. So we just got to wait and it's going to happen. But what's going to happen is as the collapse comes and they said, this is it, you guys have to come and save us, come. Everybody's going to be looking around like, oh, I'm sorry. I hate that this is happening to you, but we really can't do anything. And that's what's going to happen. And I think there's going to be a lot of bad blood. And then I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to the Ukrainian people, that 20% that were kind of waiting for this support to come in to start World War III on their behalf.
Yeah.
They might turn on and be like, you lied, you told us this. All of our brothers are dead now because of you, because you said that we were fighting this very important war, to defeat Russia, and you had our back, and you didn't.
Right. Well, yeah. One thing though, another possibility is that the French and the British will send troops, which they seem eager to do, but they've also made it clear with a guarantee of American backing, that the Americans would back them up. They've said that earlier. And then Trump himself used that word, we'll provide backup. And what does that mean? Again, with Trump, you don't,
I just don't even,
but is it,
yeah,
but the thing is that, does that mean that if the French and British troops get there and then there's troop concentrations are struck by Iskander missiles and there's mass casualties, does that mean then the Americans send in troops, or they begin to attempt to impose a no-fly zone? I mean, these are all possibilities. I mean, it really, but again, I wish I could say that this couldn't happen. I understand the constraints, it's just the weakness of the Western forces, especially European forces, and the popular resistance. But it's like popular resistance, or there's really isn't resistance. It's just like dissatisfaction. Unfortunately, we haven't seen enough people out on the streets, virtually none. The French are famous for their mass protests and so on, but that's what you need. It's like you get the French out there, with a general strike, the kind of thing they love to do about all kinds, usually about their pensions or something like that. But maybe if you get them doing it about, about sending troops to Ukraine, then maybe that would really put the brakes on their government. I mean, that's the sort of thing that you need to see over there.
Yeah, I just don't even think, if that was floated, they're saying, all right, okay, French army, time to gear up. We're headed over to Ukraine. I think there will be mass protests on the street. I just don't think that it's going to happen. I think there's got to be some realization within the military as well that this is not a war that we can win. Just if you're looking at it logistically, like we don't have the munitions to even fund this war. We see what's happened to Ukrainians. I think they do know that the casualty ratio in Ukraine is massive. And it's just hard to deny. It's like nobody wants to go there. There's a reason that they have to pull people off the street, and throw them in a van. It's because everybody knows you're just going to get blown up because Russia just has an overwhelming advantage. It has air dominance in the area. It has 10 times the amount of artillery shells. It has drone domination. It's just, you don't want to be in that, man. It's just like, and I think they know that. I mean, nobody wants to go to this front. Nobody wants.
Well, I think again, usually the realists in the government, when it comes to military matters, are actually found within the respective militaries, and we did have that statement actually from, like the British military when Starmer was talking, of sending troops there, and there was actually a leak from the British military to the press, essentially that this is all theater. We can't even do this, this mission that he's talking about. He says, our forces are so limited in such a deplorable condition. And again, it's really not much better in France or any of the other countries.
Right. I was just thinking, there are U.S. generals and NATO generals in Germany that are directing this war, and alongside Syrskyi and others in the Ukrainian army. But these generals that are in Germany that are doing this, do they not have any conscience? They just don't care that as a person that's directing troops, maybe it's because they feel like they're not American troops, that it doesn't matter if they die, that we can just send these people to their death again and again and again. And they don't have any remorse. And if you're a general, your duty is, also to protect your men. And if there's a war that cannot be won, you need to speak out. And this isn't even supposed to be your war. Like, I just feel like you're such a horrible person if you're here directing another country's people to their death, and you've just been doing this for years. Oh, well, we'll just send more. Oh, we're running out of men. Bring in the 60-year-olds. Oh, lower it down. Let's start bringing kids in. We'll kill them all. But maybe we can bring women in. It's like, who are you? You're a sociopath.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, we've had those kind of statements from Western leaders. There's no question about it. They've been pressuring the Ukrainians to, expand the pool of conscripts. That's one thing. And then I remember, like during the 2023 summer offensive, it's like after a couple of weeks, it became clear that it wasn't going anywhere, that it was destined for failure. And then the blame game started. And one thing that you heard from Western military experts is that, the Ukrainians are too casualty averse, meaning it's just like, okay, yeah,
right.
Yeah, so you're telling other people to just, to sacrifice their lives. But, of course, you wouldn't do it with your own. Again, there's also this logic that applies, to the Ukrainians themselves. Anybody that really, that push hard for this war. It's just that, okay, again, like people like Boris Johnson that helped to sabotage the Istanbul Agreement. So we have your back. You can do it. And then, what happens? Well, we see what happens. And after a year or two, it becomes apparent that they're never going to do it. And already hundreds of thousands have died. We don't know really how many, but maybe that 1.7 million is true. I guess from what I hear, the evidence is starting to pile up that it is at least largely true. In any case, we're talking about like a year or two, a couple of years ago, hundreds of thousands had already died. Well, at that point, this is the terrible logic of war, of the losing side in a war. It's just that, okay, do we just cut our losses, say now, okay, we made a mistake. Okay, all those hundreds of thousands, they died in vain. We should have made that agreement back then, but this is the best thing to do now. It's just, that's a very hard thing for anybody to say. And then but it's the truth. It's actually the best thing for Ukraine. It's just, okay, let's accept the agreement, the offer that the Russians have put on the table, and just stop this and just admit that we made a mistake in trying to pursue this war. But it's just, in general, they're just, these leaders do not have it in them to do that, because the option, the other argument you can make is just that, well, no, yeah, it's been rough. It's rougher than I thought, but there's a way out. We can win this, and if we can win this, then all those lives won't be in vain. We just have to stick with it. And that's what you find everybody saying is because that I think they just can't face the reality of what they do. But the end result of that is that you lose, even more people die, and the ultimate loss is even greater. But again, that's the logic of war.
Yeah, it just is. There's so little accountability. I just think about the 2023 summer offensive, the generals that were in charge of that, just sending waves of boys into just the walls of Russian defenses just to get chewed up just again and again. I saw so much horrible footage of all these people dying. And it's like, the people that are sending them there, are like our generals that were planning this offensive and everything. And they're just, I'm just thinking you got to be a special kind of sociopath to just to be okay with that and just put yourself, go to sleep every night like, oh well,
Yeah.
we'll find more men to kill tomorrow. It's
Oh,
nuts.
it's awful, But of course, it's not just the generals; it's the political
The
leaders.
political
I don't
right.
know.
It's just
Yeah, right.
just that there's so many people in general that are
Yeah,
okay with that don't think about the cost of war.
right.
Um, well, I think then we're kind of both in agreement then that a collapse is coming. It seems like I won't put a date on it, but it could be this even at the end of the summer. This what see happens after these cities fall, and when a collapse happens, I think it's unlikely that there will be any intervention from the West. Or is that how you're feeling? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I just don't want to. I don't know. It's unlikely, but still, that's probably true. But the possibility is real. It's not negligible. We're not talking about 1% or something. It's 1 in 4, 1 in 3. I really can't put a number on. There's a real possibility. Just looking at the behavior of these people and how deeply they have committed themselves, to this war. It's going to be very, very hard for them to just let it go and let the Russians, win it without some sort of reckless action.
Well, another reason that I feel confident that nothing is going to happen is just there is so much social unrest already within these countries. The Duran just had a video out yesterday saying that the UK economy is on the brink of collapse. I just saw Russell Brand had a video out saying England is about to erupt. It just maybe this is hyperbole, but there's clearly social and just issues really coming to a boiling point in many of these countries. And I'm just seeing the UK stuff because it's English content, but I imagine we're probably seeing similar things within Germany and in France, that there is a real division. There's a lot of unrest. So we've talked about the United States heading towards a collapse and potential social unrest, but is it much more likely that we'll see something in Europe? Or are we seeing something in Europe right now?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the European economies are in more trouble than the U.S. economies. They're already, I believe, Germany's already in recession, and yeah, whereas in many ways the American economy has benefited from this war. Because gas supplies were cut off, Russian gas supplies have been cut off almost entirely to Europe. Well, much of that has been replaced by liquefied natural gas, from the U.S., which is much more expensive. It's 3 or 4 times more expensive than the Russian gas they were getting earlier. But the Americans are actually profiting from it. And then, just because of overall European weakness, again, Trump was able to impose this new tariff regime on them, which again harms their economies further. So their economies, could very well collapse before the U.S. economy, does. Or, I won't say collapse because you just never know. Like, we pointed out there are these things that we cannot predict. Like recently there's the rise of AI, and that can give the economy a huge boost, even when everything else is going wrong. Or, to give you another example, there was all that quantitative easing following the crisis of 2009, but there was very little inflation. The one reason for that in the U.S. was that there was a whole, shale oil revolution, and that actually depressed, energy prices and made it possible. These are things that we can't predict, so we can't be certain about anything. But But there, but it is clear that all these economies are on an unsustainable course, and we're seeing real signs of stress. You know, the European economies are already, many of them are already have ceased to grow, and some of them are in actual recession. Um, so, um, yeah, there will be strains. It's just that, but the thing is, like in a crisis, sometimes that means even more reckless behavior by the leaders, and sometimes they try to go to some sort of military adventurism to rescue themselves from their domestic troubles. I don't know if that's going to work, but I'm sure that we'll see some leaders making that attempt. Um, you know, I think we see it already, like with Starmer. It hasn't worked. He's become very, very unpopular. But if he can convince, again, it's just like the hysteria. If the Russians really start, cross the Dnieper or something and start marching, you can imagine what the hysteria will be like. And there will be real efforts on the part of these leaders to convince their people that the Russians are coming to get us. Now, maybe the people won't believe them, but you never know. Propaganda, government propaganda can be very effective.
Yeah, so we always seem to paint a very bleak picture for Europe. You said there are, potential black swan events we can't predict, but I feel like it's more unlikely for Europe because they don't really have much of the tech sector like the United States has, or even their industry. They're largely deindustrializing thanks to their cutoff from Russian gas. So is there a rosy picture you're able to paint for Europe, how they can get out of this? Or is the only way that really Europe could rebound is if it normalizes relations with Russia and begins, getting natural gas from them again, things like this, lowering their energy prices? Is that really their only way out? Is that as long as they have this aggressive posture towards Russia, that we will probably see their economy stagnate indefinitely?
Right. Right. Again, it's not only the policy vis-a-vis Russia. There are problems with excessive regulation and, green policies that, independent of anything that has been done vis-a-vis Russia, is having a negative effect. But the Russian, the impact of higher energy prices is real, and it's very important, especially for industrial powers like Germany. And then there's also the push to increase military spending. I mean, their budgets are under strain. A lot of them are now, are not the deficits, but rather debt has, reached 100% of GDP, and it is surpassing that in some cases. And yet they're under this pressure to, raise their military spending to 5%. And if they could simply make peace with Russia, they can reduce those military expenditures. If they can reduce their energy prices, and then also they can get out from under the thumb of the U.S. It's just like, we're not going to, no longer are we going to be vassals and be part of this game. We're not going to be pawns of the U.S. Fighting Russia, but we're going to, because it spills over to China too. The Americans are always pressuring them to be hostile to China, and there are negative impacts there too. It would, I think if they could, really reorient themselves geopolitically, there's no question about it. There are other things they need to do, purely domestic matters, but that would certainly help their economies. And I think it's necessary, it's part of what they need to do to put themselves on a healthy economic footing.
So you think that we will see all these Western economies, for the most part, just stay stagnant and decline until essentially they agree to be part of the multipolar world, agree to leave the U.S. bloc, the international rules-based order, as they call it, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's really hurt them. I mean, again, it just.
So we have.
Yeah.
We have a couple countries that are in Europe that are kind of flirting with that, right? I mean, we have Hungary and Slovakia. They're not part of BRICS, but they seem to be moving towards that direction. Is it possible that these countries can join BRICS? And is the way forward really that when one of these countries sort of breaks from the flock and says, like, look, we're not part of this mess anymore. Mm-hmm. We are part of the whole world, not just whatever the U.S. says. And then they see that country begin to prosper and do well, and then we'll see the kind of the dominoes fall. Like everyone's like, okay, well, I guess we have to accept reality.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, the problem is that as long as they're part of NATO and they're part of the EU, again, there are just all kinds of ways to pressure them. Um, and yeah, I, I imagine both Slovakia and Hungary are having second thoughts about, their EU membership. Recently there have been these attacks by the Ukrainians on the Druzhba pipeline, or at least a branch of it that has been supplying those two countries. And you would think that, well, here. This is something vital to the economy of my country. I'm a member of the EU. This is actually being attacked, by this other state. This is like this really an act of war against my country. What's the EU saying? What's NATO saying? It's
Article 5.
It's there. Yeah, right. It should be, but obviously. But I think that should tell them that they need to actually get out of the EU, and that, and I'm not sure, for example, that you can become a member of BRICS if you're also a member of NATO. I think it'd be very hard, especially since, part of the understanding of the BRICS is we don't impose sanctions on each other. And while they're parts of those organizations, they're constantly pressured to be imposing sanctions on Russia, China, India, whatever.
Where was that pipeline? Was it in Ukraine that they attacked it, or was it in...
No, it's actually in Russian territory. Right. I think there was one branch of it anyway was shut down by the Ukrainians earlier, but there is another one. Maybe it goes through Bryansk or something, and then, I'm not sure exactly. I have to see it on a map, but it was actually hit within Russia, and it more than once. It was hit one place and then repaired, and it's been hit again. And the Slovaks and the Hungarians are furious, for obvious reasons. But that shows. In fact, again, it suggests actually that the EU and NATO are supporting. I don't think that Zelensky would have even tried it if he didn't have a green light from them on this. They want them to be shut down. They don't want to see real independence, real sovereignty on the part of these countries. And so I think those countries really should really think, if they want to enter that new multipolar world, I think that they perhaps have to say bye-bye to the EU and to NATO. And that would start something. There are two small countries, but there's potentially a third that's going to come online, and that's, I've heard, the Czech Republic. I guess, there's going to be an election there, and the potential victor could actually join that club, and again pursue an independent course.
As these economic woes begin to mount in Europe, where is the blame largely placed? I mean, I imagine the leaders will want to place it on Russia, but I imagine the average citizen, they have to understand. I mean, for example, the Nord Stream pipeline. The story that even that the Western media is pushing out, that Ukraine blew it up, but we all know that the U.S. blew it up. But either way, this isn't. Why would you?
Right,
shouldn't that make you upset? I mean, these are supposed to be the people that are your friends that you're supporting. And the same thing with this other pipeline that just got attacked. It's like, wait, who's our friend? We're here. Our economies are tanking. We're in trouble. I'm having trouble feeding my family and paying rent. And why is everything getting so expensive? And who's blowing up our energy infrastructure? America and Ukraine. Why are we helping these guys again? Why is this Russia's fault?
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, that's just that. You don't have to make any kind of convoluted argument. You say that these people are our enemies. They're attacking us. Something, our energy infrastructure. And obviously some people have noticed, and I think that's part of the reason for the rise of the off day and.
It's a pretty easy thing to notice. Yeah, that's what's kind of surprising. Because the Germans, you guys are smart, right? I mean, this is
right. But at the establishment parties, clearly, like Olaf Scholz, he knew what happened when that pipeline was blown up, and he was engaged in the cover up. And I'm sure that much of the establishment, because much of the establishment in Germany and these other countries were always opposed to that pipeline. It happened under Merkel. but she was constantly being pressured by the Americans and by other, others within Europe to stop the construction. Then when she left and Olaf Scholz came in, you had a government in Germany that actually didn't want to have that pipeline, which is just crazy actually in itself. So, so it was complicit, or it kind of just looked the other way when it got blown up. Yeah, no, it's a remarkable state of affairs, and so like just on those grounds, I would say like I don't need to know anything else, but any government that would be actually in some way complicit or accept an attack on our very important energy infrastructure is essentially they're traitors. These are enemies of us, the German people. That's the way they should look at it. And clearly some of them do, but I'm surprised that not more of them do.
Yeah. I mean,
it's extraordinary. I guess there are a lot of people who just have this abiding faith in the old, political parties that have guided Germany for decades. And you have to say successfully for until fairly recently. But they just say, well, our leaders tell us everything's fine, and we have to keep on believing in them, and that's the way, unfortunately, a lot of people think. But it's not going to last forever. There's a reason. Again, the AfD is now the most popular political party in Germany.
What does Article 5 say when one NATO country attacks another NATO country?
Right.
How does that work?
Yeah, right.
I mean, seriously. I mean, that's what happened.
Right. Russia never attacked you, but the U.S. I'm confident it's the U.S. In spite of this recent arrest or whatever. It's just the story that they came up about the Ukrainians was just goofy, and I've never believed it. So, yeah.
This whole 3 years, the whole discourse around it, it's been just so topsy-turvy, so insane.
Yeah. Right. It's going to be hard for when people look back at this history, they're going to be scratching their heads and like, so what happened?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
We'll be telling stories about this for decades, centuries.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
even worse in Gaza, Palestine. Just like, whoa, what was going on? How did we allow this? How did this happen? I mean,
yeah,
the whole thing is. Okay, well, is there something else you want to go over, Dad? Any other?
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of a footnote to what I was saying about the battle lines. Just one thing is, the Russians have. Not only have they continued to beef up their forces, they have more soldiers, they have more equipment and everything, but they've also changed their tactics. And people have noticed that you're just not seeing any tanks or armored vehicles out there anymore. And that's something kind of I predicted. I think the age of the tank is over. I think it's coming to, maybe it still has a role, but it seems like, the Russians have agreed that under the current circumstances, they have a lot of tanks and they're still making them, but they actually don't help at the front lines anymore. So they're mounting these attacks, on foot and on electric motorbikes and on dune buggies, apparently, and finding that to be much more effective.
It's like Mad Max.
Yeah. So there's been this change in tactics. Now, again, on the Ukrainian side, it's just like the only thing that's really slowing, I think, the Russians down is their use of drones. Because of the drones, you still have to be careful. You can't, and that means that the Russians continue to proceed cautiously. Now, the Russians, it also seems clear, especially over the last few weeks, have really have moved ahead in drones and have a clear advantage. If you go back a year ago or so, it was maybe fairly equal in drones. There was both sides. That was one area where Ukraine was unusually strong. And at the start of the war, the Ukrainians clearly had an advantage, but that has changed. But still, the Ukrainians have enough drones where the Russians need to be cautious. Now, the thing is, my understanding is that if the Russians break through in a big way, they can actually pretty much neutralize the effect of drones. It's just that, because the drones have to, the operators have to set up in these different places, and it's not, it's not something like, just one guy with a drone can and launch it. You have a kind of a system, you have a network, and you have, operators in hidden places. But if you can get past the operators, quickly, then it's really different. You can actually break through the drone barrier, and that's maybe when we see potentially a very rapid advance, and maybe that's when the tanks will reappear. We don't know. We'll see. So anyway, I thought that was just an interesting footnote that would add to this.